Welcome into the NASCAR Betting Preview Show. We got a great show in store for you guys, so stay tuned, stick around. We're talking trucks, we're talking Xfinity, and most of all, the NASCAR Cup Series racing action as the playoffs are about to begin. It's the Summer Classic from Daytona. Let's get into the NASCAR Betting Preview Show. Now we are live for the NASCAR Betting Preview Show. I'm your host, Tino Patino, stepping in for Derek Yoder. Derek, thanks for giving me the reins this week. Super excited to talk to Phil and Greg as we get set for some NASCAR racing action from Daytona. Boys, I want to know, first off, how you're doing in this one, but also, did you make any money last weekend at Michigan? Greg, we'll start with you. How you been, and how were the bets last weekend?
I've been good. Michigan was pain. I don't know how many folks saw it, but my biggest bet of the week was Harrison Burton to not lead a lap, and then he stayed out and just killed me. So lost 2.25 on that. So yeah, that was painful. Enjoyed the race otherwise, but yeah, it was a little rough.
I think the funny part about that too is, right, didn't they do the whole feature of the 21 car too? So they were like in their pit backs and talking to the team and everything. Yeah, that one hurts. That one hurts.
They were riding along the entire time, and I saw it come in. And it hurt. It hurt.
Yeah, salt in the wound there. How about you, Phil? How were the bets? How you been?
Sorry, I was muted, guys. I'm having a rough week. First time I've had to go back in the office in about a year. Been in the office all week, going back tomorrow. It is draining. So shout out to anyone who does that every single day. I am not in that muscle memory phase right now. And so it feels just so good to be talking with you guys. Appreciate everyone joining in here. And, Michigan, I made it out up some money. I was up just under 4 units. So happy with that. I was really, I said on the podcast this week, I think Michigan might be becoming like one of my favorite tracks. I was super entertained. I thought it was a solid race. We had a ball don't lie situation with Reddick leading and then having to go out and prove it again. I was glad that he was able to retain it. So all in all, good situation there. But going back to Greg, that bet, that's true degenerate status. And I fucking love that. I probably would have tailed you. Now that makes me think, do we need to get ahead of time? I don't know if they announce who they're going to be on the pit box for ahead of time, but if you knew that on a Wednesday, you probably wouldn't have thrown that bet down so heavy because the fix would have been in. They would have stayed out for that purpose. So awesome bet. I'm sorry it didn't hit for you though.
Yeah, any more? I guess we'll see if any more of those type of crazy bets. Harrison Burton leading laps are coming in this show too. That's just insane to me too. I would love to see if they did announce it, because that's Corey LaJoie, we're gonna be in the pit box with him. Then yeah, maybe he doesn't flip that race. But all right, now it's time to get into some rapid fire here. I prepared some questions for you guys. We're gonna fire them off now. Phil, starting with you. Truck series, racing on Sunday. What are your thoughts about that? But also, are there any bets you'd like to get out for the trucks as a whole? Because we'll be talking Cup all throughout the show. So if you got any truck guys we need to keep an eye out for, now would be the time to let us know.
Yeah. So a couple notes on the trucks. One, do I like it on Sunday? I was telling you guys before the show, I think it's cool that they give them, I guess, the spotlight of the Sunday slate. But I prefer trucks, earlier in the week at night. That's the way I like the trucks to start off the weekend, but it's good for them that they're separated, in Milwaukee. Should be good. Second quick note, Derek and I were supposed to record tonight, our truck pod. there's no lines out. I don't see anything. I've been all over the place, looking left and right, can't find any odds. And that's unfortunate. So pod will probably be a little delayed this week as Derek is flying down to Daytona. So I say all that to say, looking quickly at some of the just really fast entered comp tracks, I think you have to be all over Ty Majeski this week. I have 11 comps tracks looking back a couple years. He's got 3 wins and 8 top 5s. I mean, I'm sure he's going to be heavily favored. I'm anxious to see what the line is on Majeski, but he's got to be in your card in some way, shape, or form. And another Grant Enfinger track. I would hope that they give us another decent line on him for a top 5. It's been paying off for us. We're starting the playoffs. And this is, I'm really liking where the 9 team is right now with Grant Enfinger. They are hitting their stride at the perfect time. And that veteran status for him, I think, is going to also prove very valuable. So a couple guys towards the top of the board. I'm not getting deep with that stuff, but without lines, it's kind of tough to dive in.
Yeah, for sure. Now, I know this is rapid fire, but one last thing about the trucks. I mean, it's playoffs for them too, right? I mean, what's your thought process with that? I feel like, to me, obviously their playoffs are starting earlier than Xfinity and Cup, but I haven't heard much about it. I feel like, Greg and I were talking off air too, and it was like, this is not the best season for the trucks. What do you think about the playoffs before it does happen on Sunday? Will it be more exciting than the regular season, hopefully?
Well, I think that it's going to, I find it really interesting because with the trucks, you've got at least 3 big names that should make the Final 4. You've got Eckes, you got Hyman, you've got Majeski. Okay. Now that Majeski's finally picking it up. And then it's like, will one of those guys falter? Who's going to screw up? Somebody blows the tires, finish dead last, like, oh my God, who's going to fill in those spots? So I find that entertaining as hell. And I also am really cheering for a guy like Daniel Dye, who snuck into the playoffs as the 10th seed. Like, I'm really focused to see, like, you only need to be in the top 8. 2 guys get knocked out in the trucks, not 4. So it'd be really cool to see somebody like that take such a huge step, not only just making it into the playoffs, but making it in the next round. Very unlikely, but I'm cheering for stuff like that. So if you really dive into the points and things like that, the races will definitely be entertaining, and I'm cheering for guys like that.
Sweet. Awesome. Can't wait to see it, and can't wait for those lines to be put up as well. Sports books, please. I want to listen to what Phil has to say, so let's tune in there when it happens. Greg, how about you? Rapid fire Xfinity series. Are there any bets that you'd like to talk about real quick with them, or just your outlook as a whole heading into what has been, I feel like, a crazy Xfinity year thus far?
Yeah, I mean, the problem with Xfinity is there's probably some value down the board because, A Hill, is basically a curse word in this household at this point. And, he's sitting down there around plus 300, which you cannot bet at a drafting track. Like, it's not bettable. So there's probably some value down the line. The question is where. I've looked around. I was hoping maybe there was some value. Caesars did give us full top manufacturer line. So, they've been pretty much just giving us top Chevy most races. They did give us top Ford and top Toyota this week. I didn't really see anything in there that was jumping out at me. That's kind of where I was hoping to find a little bit of value. Particularly, I was hoping, we might get some Ryan Truex or, Jeffrey Earnhardt, some little bit of value on those guys. Just hasn't been there. I think it's one that we'll keep looking at to see if, some value some money comes in somewhere and shifts us some value. Haven't seen it yet, but I'm sure it is there because, again, when you've got a favorite sitting at plus 300 at Daytona, there's got to be something somewhere.
Yeah, for sure. I was looking at Parker Kligerman. Some news came out today, right? They're getting penalized, or that team is at least. So maybe part of the storyline's building there for that team, but we'll see as the Xfinity series gets underway. All right, now we saw also in the Xfinity series a car flip. Same thing happened to Corey LaJoie on Sunday at Michigan. So rapid fire to you, Phil, here. Will we see another flip in any of the series this weekend at Daytona?
Oh, that's a funny question. I saw, just as I was on my way home, I saw that they are implementing something right away that's supposed to go right into effect at Daytona. to counteract that. So even though it's a quick fix, I'm gonna if we had a 0.5 car flips, and I guess you'd have to define what a car flip is. Like you could wreck and spin through the air, but like, are you like on your hood, that sort of thing, or roof rather? I'll say no, just because they made such a quick change, and I'd have to imagine that the guys behind the scenes know what they're doing. So 0.5, I'll go under that. If
All right,
it's,
cool.
even
Yeah.
odds.
I think, no one's necessarily rooting for a flip either. I'll say that one in here, but that's what I wrote down for
Hey.
rapid fire. Now, I mean, hey, if it happens, it happens. Corey LaJoy was perfectly okay. Had a
Yeah.
little grass in the cockpit, could have potentially planted some flowers with that. I saw his in-car camera there, so we'll see what happens at Daytona. Always a wild one. All right, now, Greg, here's a good one for you. I hope. Will we see a winner win Daytona that is outside of the current NASCAR Cup Series playoff standings? Will someone win and potentially get in this weekend?
No, because I think the winner comes from one of our current winners, or it comes from one of our 3 guys who are currently in on points. But well, I guess we technically have 5 who are in on points, but not on wins. But I think it comes from, I guess we only have 4. I'm sorry, my brain is not working on that. We got 4 of them. I think it comes from one of those guys who are right on the points line. I think you see a Bubba win. We'll see probably some strong effort out of RFK, or I think the most likely result, we're about to see Austin Dillon get himself back in, and Joey Logano takes him out, steals the win, and we have Logano in victory lane.
Man, that would be amazing. And I don't blame you for, thinking, because we got Ross Chastain +1, -1 is Bubba. So it's like everyone is so close there around that action. I could see a Bubba, I could see a Ross Chastain, even a Busch or 2. Phil, what are you thinking there? Because my answer quickly to that question would be yes. I could see an Austin Dillon. I could see a Kyle Busch. Hey, why not Todd Gilliland? What about you? Do you think someone surprises us and wins and gets in who's currently not already in the playoff picture?
Well, I saw the name come up a couple times in the chat, and I think we got to talk about Kyle Busch. The fact that Daytona typically is the last race of the year, and now it's the right before it, you're thinking about guys like Gill and Dillon, the back markers. We're never talking about Kyle Busch in a must-win situation going into Daytona, but here we are. And when you're looking at the stats here, Kyle Busch is like kind of sneaky on the super speedways. I mean, Ryan Stevens win the race.info. As you probably know, Greg, he's got him ranked first going into this weekend. He's got
our consensus has him first.
Yeah. That's really solid and kind of surprising, but like, I feel like the last few times we've talked about the super speedways, it's kind of been a similar situation, like really decent enough numbers for Kyle. I'm trying to find what I have here because I had him in a head-to-head matchup. Just 3 top 10, 7 top. Last 7 or 10 races at Daytona. He's 3 top 10, 7 for 10, finishing in the top 20. It's head-to-head material. He's second best driver rating in the last 10 races at Daytona. So just like driver rating for Busch is solid, and I think what you're looking at super speedways driver rating to me is very important, because sometimes it tells a different story, and that story is very common. So I think Kyle Busch could easily win, and any other season he's well within the cut line, so it's not a story. But seeing what he did last weekend, running well, making a strategy play, finishing top 5, happy momentum coming out of Michigan, I don't think it's too far out of the question that 8 car is doing something this weekend. So, and I saw a couple folks in the chat agree. So we'll see. It would be a hell of a story if, the wild card race went to Kyle Busch.
Yeah. And that's something that why
just
I've
to
been
build
so
on their
excited about.
stats.
Yeah, for sure.
I was going to say, I mean, just, when you talk about the stats, we look at over the 10 races in the Gen 7 car at Daytona and Talladega, he has the second best average running position in the Cup Series, 13.02. The only person who has a better average running position at these tracks is Chase Elliott. And Chase Elliott only has him by 0.12 positions. All right. So he has been really strong at these tracks. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, that's to me is the point that I'm so excited for, right? Is like we know Kyle Busch has been struggling all year, and I've been saying, to people, okay, if with how Busch raced at Atlanta as well, and how he's been racing at Daytona, like he hasn't won Daytona 500, but he's been so close because of that storyline, because of that fact, like they just keep bringing cars and cars there. RCR, better super speedway racers than we've seen at their other type of racetracks this season. But now you add the Michigan momentum, like Phil mentioned as well, and the stats like Greg talked about. Oh, Kyle Busch, he could be coming back to us at the perfect time. Also, like you guys mentioned too, got to shout out the chat. Brian saying Busch, Wallace, Chastain, all the guys he's thinking about. Me too, honestly. Those cut line guys I feel like have been showing up and will continue to do so. Charles in the chat as well. Head-to-heads are up against KB. So, let's continue to talk about those head-to-heads because I feel like you guys got a lot of good things to say for the Ride or Fade segment. Phil, you got something for us here with that?
I do. So my hands up on this. I know, Skybox, when he was on, he would hate betting head-to-heads on the super speedways. And I totally understand anyone who shies away from that. But I, for one, really enjoy it. And I've been successful recently, which makes it even more fun. So the head-to-head that I'm calling out tonight, I got to check on the odds. I did this last night, but MGM, another thing that I found yesterday doing my notes for my show was that every book seemed to have like a different personality, like a different market that they were, kind of shining for. And MGM to me was the head-to-head book. So we've got a -120 for Chris Buescher over Ross Chastain. Okay. And it's cut line type of race. Those guys are matched up obviously for a reason, but this matchup is consistency versus not consistent whatsoever. So, for Ross, a 21.7 average finish looking at the last 10 races at Daytona versus a 12.5 average finish for Chris Buescher. He's got a win, 4 top 5s, which is tied for the most in NASCAR in that time span, 8 top 20s, which I'm lowering the bar, super speedways, top 20s. It shows that you can hang around. In the last 6 super speedways, both Talladega and Daytona, since the start of last year, he's 5 for 6. 1 win, 3 top 5s, 5 for 6 top 20s, 5-1 head-to-head versus Chastain. And going back to the last 10 races at Daytona, 8-2 versus Chastain. I think Buescher has figured this track out. I think Chastain is kind of a loose cannon, just as a week-to-week basis, not even just the super speedway track. So now when you take a loose cannon, you throw him into the most volatile situation possible. That's not a guy I want to be on the side of. And in fact, I'm going to go with kind of a steady Eddie at these tracks in Chris Buescher. So -120 on MGM is what I got it at. I hope that's still valid for folks as I'm giving it out here, but still Buescher over Chastain, any book you can see it. I would ride with that.
I like that. I'm riding that for sure. And I like the point of the consistency too. I feel like at these super speedways, they've sort of changed a little bit. We're not seeing that much chaos as we have sort of in the past. I feel like the front runners stay there. The guys run, in a train for most of the race too. We're not seeing jockeying for position as much as we have in the past. I can see Chastain going for something that's not there, being a little bit too aggressive. Kind of like he did in the Daytona 500. I do want to get to back to Charles's question here. Head-to-heads against KB are against Byron or Elliott, all at -115. Greg, before we get to your prop here in head-to-head, what do you think for Charles here? Does he take KB against Byron or Elliott?
Well, so I enjoy betting head-to-heads at super speedways, but I'm generally not interested in betting a head-to-head at a super speedway at anything that's not plus money. So, and certainly against those two, I would not. I would be on the other side of those. Just I think with the consistency, again, we've talked about, I just mentioned, well, KB's been, really consistent at the super speedways in the Gen 7 car, and that's true. But this year it's just been such a, up, down, all over the place. I would be probably wanting to stay away from those, period. If I'm going to be betting on, Kyle Busch, I want to be in a higher upside market. I want to be in that, winner market, that, top 3 market, that top Chevy market. I don't know what the odds on any of those are right now, but that's where I want to be with him. I think the upside of Kyle Busch is where I want to be, not on the kind of more, low risk, low reward.
Yeah, for sure. I think that makes sense. And especially with Kyle Busch too, like we are expecting him to be there, but at minus, we can't take anything that isn't plus money for a super speedway. Like you said, did you have a rider fade for us here in this one for your
Yeah. So like I said, I'm not really interested in anything that's not giving me plus money, but I do got a plus money one that I want, and it's at Caesars. It's Austin Cindric plus 110 over Alex Bowman. And basically this boils down to Cindric is a one-trick pony at this point, but this is his trick, right? This is what he does. This is his trick. This is what the man does, and he is very, very good at it. If we look at the sim center that we have over at Win the Race, we've basically got this as a toss-up. I think it technically gives Bowman like a 50.1% and Cindric a 49.9, right? But I mean, it is as much of a coin flip as you can get. So if you're going to give me plus 110 on that, I'm going to take that every time. And honestly, if anything, I think that's underselling Cindric. I think his ability on these courses is definitely higher. And I think this is something we talked about somewhat in the Win the Race Discord earlier today. I think if we look at just Ford as a team, I want Ford as a team over any of the other manufacturers. Ford seems to work better at these tracks than anybody else. They figure it out together. Toyota is starting to show some of that, but it seems like the Chevys are so often just kind of whatever, it's so hard. And so give me the guy who's in a Ford, who's got teammates who are more likely to help him. And I'm going to take that, every time at that plus money. So yeah, that's mine is Cindric plus 110.
Love it. I'm all over Ford in this one too, or at least I'm gonna be after that stat. And Big Ross in the chat saying Ford has tried to get out and control the pace of these super speedway races in the next gen. He thinks that's played into their success, and so do we. I mean, they're able to work together. We're seeing guys lead races too, like Todd Gilliland, Michael McDowell, and still be able to maintain that speed alongside the Penske drivers and Logano, Blaney, and Cindric. Phil, back to you here. Do you have any other rider fades for us in this one?
I'll just comment on that one, and I'll throw a last minute one going back to the Kyle Busch situation. But I think I would ride with that. I mean, I do have Bowman kind of circled as a longer shot to win the race, with you deal with the high upside. But going back to what I was saying about driver rating, like Austin Cindric is high in the driver rating stats, no matter how you slice it up. It's the last 10 at Daytona, the last 6 super speedways, the last 5 night races at Daytona. Like, he's high in the driver rating stat. He doesn't necessarily have the finishes because something has happened. He's obviously had that victory in the past, but the point remains, if you're taking that bet, it's because Cindric has the ability to loop up with the Fords. They have a better strategy. He's got a really good car, and he's got that super speedway sense to stay in the game and be a factor. If it falls apart at the end, that's fine. You just got to hope that Bowman has already crashed out. But Cindric has proven. So like you said, this is his trick. I love that line. The other head-to-head I'll just throw in there, going back to the Kyle Busch point, I agree with Greg. Like, those big dogs against Kyle, I'm not playing that because those guys are a big deal. But MGM has him matched up against Chase Briscoe. And I always say, on the Win the Race pre-ranks, I look for the biggest discrepancy. This is the biggest discrepancy I've ever seen on the pre-race ranks. It's a 17 spot difference. They have Busch first and Briscoe 17th. So huge discrepancy there. There's points to be made. Briscoe has had, I think he had a 10th at Daytona there, but at Daytona head to head, it's minus 125. So it doesn't fit the bill for Greg, like you're saying plus money stuff. But if you were dying to play Kyle Busch in a head to head, I would go that route because it's punching down against Briscoe, in my opinion.
I like that. I like that a lot too. Greg, what are you thinking here? Any more from you or any others that, whether or not it's thought process or anything in terms of a head-to-head matchup that you want us to be prepared for heading into this weekend?
No, I mean, I think that's the only one that I've gone out and gone ahead and bet on. But I think, my strategy on these, and it did really well in the 500, did really well, when we went to Talladega, is again, I'm looking for those plus money matchups. And as long as the guys are reasonably well matched, I'm going to take the plus side of that, because when you throw in the chaos, you throw in that, kind of element of randomness that particularly pops up when we get to this, again, it's not the cutoff race this time, but it's your last best chance if you're not going to win at Darlington, which, we can easily say 60% of the field has zero chance to win at Darlington, right? I mean, just from what we've seen in the package, right? So you're going to see that chaos. You're going to see some of that. And I think, again, I'm just going to give me those plus matchups. And that's just what I'm looking for. That's kind of what I'm scrolling through and looking for. The only other plus matchup that I saw that kind of fit that bill was Byron versus McDowell. But again, I think in that case, you're giving me McDowell plus 110, and it's probably not quite enough. Because I don't think they're quite equal. As good as McDowell has shown himself to be on these tracks, I think he has not led as often as I think a lot of people have in their mind. He's been towards the front, but he has not been all the way up front. And so McDowell has his reputation as a super speedway guy, and he has been great at them. There's no doubt about that. But I don't think he's quite as good here as his reputation would have some people believe. And so that plus 110 is probably not quite enough for me there.
Definitely agree about that one too. Considering too, with William Byron winning the Daytona 500, obviously this will be a different race potentially because, we won't see the same exact finishers, but it being back at Daytona. Also, we look back at Atlanta. Byron was also strong there and has won at both, the summer Daytona and Atlanta's too. So to me, I think Byron has just been too strong to sort of take that McDowell, like you mentioned. All right, guys, now let's sort of transition into some position prompts. And before I get what you guys are thinking about and your thoughts, we got to go take a look at the chat because earlier on, we saw my guy Drake commenting. What are your thoughts on splitting a unit on the legacy guys for Top Toyota? So here we are. It's time to talk about position prompts. And then he even throws out for us, their odds as well. Phil, we'll start with you here. What are your thoughts on splitting a unit for the legacy guys for Top Toyota? Is that something that you'd be interested in the type of race we'll be seeing in the Super Speedway?
So as far as like unit allocation, I would leave that up to you, the gambler. But if I'm interested in those guys, yes. The way I laid out my card this week, I call it the shotgun unit, shotgun spray approach. And I take 1/10 of a unit on anyone 20 to 1 or longer, and I throw it on 10 drivers. So you got over a quarter of the field. And I've got Jones in on that for, the reasons why anybody would think that. But I also was looking at John Hunter Nemechek for a plus 500 top 10 number because Nemechek's 3 races here are 11th, 11th, and 7th. So he's right there, surprisingly. So to answer that question, like Top Toyota, yeah, there's not that many Toyotas. And when wrecks happen, if they happen, that's not too bad of a situation to be in if you're legacy, because you don't know how they're going to play it. Maybe they hang back to start and you let the bigger dogs kind of fall out. Obviously a guy like Wallace scares you in that situation, but for those numbers, I'm not hating on that at all. So this is where you have fun. This is what makes the summer Daytona race fun, is if you start calling out guys like that. So yeah, I'm interested in that situation there, Drake.
Sweet. I love that there. Now, moving on to the chat. Chat's got a lot of position prop questions, so I love that here from Charles. KB top 5 at plus 325. Greg, what do you think about that? That is plus money that we are hoping for KB in this one.
Yeah, that's not the worst. I think the problem with that is, I think when you look at Busch, I think if he's top 5, he's going to put himself in a spot to either win from there or wreck out from there, right? I think that's what we got to look at with him, is kind of the risk of that. In terms of what that, comes out at, he's been about 20% of his laps in the top 5 in the Gen 7 at these tracks. He's 2 for 10 top 5 doing that. So, again, he's right around that, 21%, of the time, 21% of the time he's getting up there. So when we start looking at the number, what was our number? Plus
325 here for Kyle
25.
Busch top 5.
I don't know that it's quite enough there. I think, again, I would want to go perhaps even higher and push myself to the top 3 market and see where that came out. At 325, our implied odds are 23.5%. So our implied odds are above where we've got our actual estimated odds. So probably not for me. Again, maybe top 3, because I could see him like wrecking at the line and still crossing second or third and being that. But I think 5 just puts him, honestly, I think that like 4 to 5 spot for Busch puts him in a super, super dangerous position of just like making an aggressive, nutty move. I'd rather just take him, at the higher value market.
For sure. Definitely think the higher value is the way to go with Kyle Busch. Shout out to Brian here for letting all of us know about some good value. He said if you have Bovada, Buescher is 7-1 top 4 there and 4-1 most other books. I mean, that to me, I'm seeing that's got to be a play. 7-1 for Buescher. Consistency has been his key and factor at these super speedways. Him and Brad always linking up, and to me, I feel like they are the best duo at these super speedway tracks. Those cars are always set up very similar. If one guy's finishing 19th, the other one 20th. We saw at Michigan last weekend, 5th and 6th, I believe. So right there at the super speedways, I expect them to continue to be fast. Brad finished second at Talladega, the most recent super speedway race. So shout out to Brian. Thank you again for letting us know about that. I feel like there's no question, right, guys? If we're seeing 7-1 Buescher, we're throwing a little bit on that, right?
In the top Ford market, 100%. I think that's a great number on him. I don't know. I've not run the math on what our sim has that come out as. But I can tell you if I drop back to just kind of the overall stats at these tracks, he has the 3rd best average running position of the Fords. He has consistently been up there. He's got a great average starting position, great average finishing position in terms of all of that. He's running right around. He's finishing where he's running. So, yeah, I don't hate that at all.
Awesome. All right, we'll keep going with the props now. Got to shout out Charles. Thank you so much for the chat donation there, saying I'm doing a good job. Love hearing from Greg and Phil. I love hearing from Greg and Phil too. Appreciate the compliment and appreciate the chat donation there. Really, does help support the program and everything that we got going on at IBT. All right, so now if you guys have any more questions about props or anything else, keep putting it in the chat. We'll continue to answer them as we go down. But Greg, did you have any position prompts that you had prepared for us in this one that you'd like to talk about? It could be top 3, top 5, top 10, anything else in the market there that you like.
Yeah, so my favorite one right now is Justin Haley, top 10. We're getting him at plus 500 over at 365. I think he's basically half of that at every other book at this point. I think he might be down to plus 450 at Hard Rock. That was the other spot that had him up there at plus 500 to start with. Am I going to take him at plus 450? No, I'm actually not even going to take him at plus 450 there. But if we look at Justin Haley's history here, it's really, solid. He has not had the finishes. He's had a little bit of rough luck on the finishes. He's 1 for 10 at the super speedways in the Gen 7 car. But again, he's got about 20% of his laps in the top 10. And then again, let's just drop back and look at his performance at these tracks in the Xfinity series. I think he's missed the top 10 once in the Xfinity series at these tracks, right? So he's got the sense. He knows what he's doing. We're looking at RCR being vastly, vastly improved from, what they were in the past. And so I'm going to go ahead and take him at that plus 500. Again, personally, you got to look at what your own risk tolerance is. Personally, for me, that's a half a unit play. Because again, we're just looking at some chaos here, right? I'm not trying to load up on really much of anything the way that I would in a non-super speedway race.
I like that. Good to note too, non-super speedway and super speedway difference with that. That's one thing I did want to know before I throw it to you, Phil. The top 10 at Talladega, the most recent super speedway race this season, it had drivers in mix like Alfredo, Gillen, Hemrick, Burton. And then, we also see Gregson, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. too. Like, I don't even want to leave those guys out because they can provide us with good value. Phil, are you looking at any one of those sort of sneaky surprise drivers that are going to potentially come through here in a super speedway race like this?
So I don't know if I would call him sneaky. I mean, you guys can tell me. I think this is going to be a popular name this week, in my opinion. But he's going from planting flowers in his car on his roof last week to a top 10 this week. It's Corey LaJoie. Bet365, Greg called it out. I mean, they've got phenomenal top 10 numbers if you have access to that book. It's crazy. LaJoie is 3-1 for a top 10 on that book. And this isn't necessarily like a long shot. I think LaJoie has put up numbers enough to be considered like kind of part of the boys as we're going through the top 10. So the last 6 super speedway races, he's got 2 top 5s, 3 top 10s. That's a 50% hit rate, 5 for 6 top 20. So he's keeping the car in the game. 5th in average finish in that time span, by the way. And the last 10 Daytona races, he's again 5th in average finish, 13.5, and he's 50% hit rate for finishing inside the top 10. And that includes last 2 races doing that for us. So if you're on that bet, he's 2 for 2 in the last 2 races. He finished 4th in the 500 earlier this season, 8 for 10 at Daytona, finishing inside the top 20. So to me, 3-1 for a guy with those numbers, like that's pretty solid. I'm not smart enough to go back and look at notes to compare, but like 50% hit rates on multiple type of data sets, right? Last 6 super speedways, more recent stuff. And then history at Daytona, both 50% hit rates. A guy 3-1, that's not normal. So I'm very interested in the Corey LaJoie. I played that at Bet365.
I think he's motivated too, right? Like, he hears what people are saying about him. He obviously got fired or let go, and then he flips his car over too. Like, I think if there's ever going to be a time where he steps up and actually executes in a race, this could be it. And he's also been in position to win this race in the past. What was a couple years ago, 2021, when Ryan Blaney won it? Corey LaJoie was on the front row for that final restart there. So to me, that gets me excited. And comparing that to DraftKings Sportsbook, which I have open right here next to me, it's plus 165. So also remember, shop around, guys. Yeah, that's a huge number. One thing I wanted to touch on here from Big Ross, he was saying top 5 has been his favorite market to bet. This week, he doesn't have any interest. He thinks it's only outrights, long shot top 10s, and plus money matchups. We're right on with you, Big Ross. I'm glad you said that because that's exactly what we've been kind of talking about here. Those underdog guys, or even Corey LaJoie, who always rises to the top at these super speedways. Greg, do you have any other position props for us in this one?
No, I mean, not that I've bet, although I will agree with Phil. Like, if you go and you look at, what we've got out there at our, at 365, some of the long shots, I've not bet these yet, right? But just compared to what they are at other books, they are super, value on that, like, I hate to freaking say it, but Cody Ware 14-1, right? All right, he's like 9-1 at most other books, right? It's worth a sprinkle out there. BJ, like he's out there at 20-1. Give me a sprinkle on that. Like if you're looking to have some fun, like I'm not betting those right now, but if you want to go out there and you want to toss like, a 1/10 of a unit on those guys, just to be like, hey, a little bit of chaos, little bit of what happens. This is the race to do that, right? This is the race to say like, hey, I'm going to throw a couple of these long shot darts. And particularly when you're playing that top 10 market, you don't even need them to win, right? You give yourself a little more cushion and you're still getting those huge values that we typically, only see in the outright market. So yeah, give me that. I think those are interesting bets. I think you can see some, again, a couple more out there on 365, in that same market. Zane Smith 7-1. He's had such an absolutely trash year. Like he's just, he's having a rotten year. But again, 7-1 for top 10. I don't mind a splash on that.
Especially for a driver that is capable of doing it, right? We saw it last week in Michigan too. Maybe we see a little bit of momentum factor from there. One driver I wanted to ask you guys about before we move on to our outright winner segment here is going to be Eric Jones in this one. He's a driver that I really thought could be the surprise winner at the super speedways like we've seen in the past this season. He hasn't come through really. At Talladega, maybe he would have been in the mix had they not all wrecked when they were working together for the Toyotas there. But he's plus 110 on DraftKings specifically. specifically. There could be better value out there. That's just what I have pulled up right here in front of me. But Eric Jones at plus 110 or higher, is that something, Phil and Greg, that you guys would consider taking in this one for a top 10?
Plus 110 for Eric Jones. Man, see, if I'm taking Jones, I kind of similar to what Greg was saying about Kyle Busch for a top 5. Like if he's up there at the end, I feel like he's going to be going balls to the walls, and you can get him at 37-1 to win the race. So like that's where I'd rather. Plus 110 is just not wetting my whistle. I mean, finished 8th in the 500, so like he's capable of doing it. His last 2 races, 8th and 18th, those are 2 of his better finishes at Daytona recent history. And he finished 6th at Talladega a couple years ago. I think it was last spring. So like there's precedent there to rock with the top 10. I just feel like the plus 110, I would have expected a better number there for Eric Jones on a top 10. So I'll probably hold off, but I have thrown a 10th of a unit on him to win the race. So it's not that I'm off of him. It's just I would need a better look at the odds. What book was that you said that?
That was on DraftKings specifically.
Let me
so
see
there
what
could be higher value.
We're getting 3 to 1 on him at 3.
Yeah, so that's frisky.
There you go.
That's frisky.
Worth it.
That's frisky. Yeah, I still like LaJoy over Jones in that scenario, but like it's frisky. I could get down with that.
Yeah, I think that's probably about where I am too. It's close there at 3, but I think again I want the more upside market with him. I like the his outright number more than I like that 3-1 even for a top 10.
Okay. All right. Well, hey, that's good to know too, because we're going to get into the outright market right now. Let's switch over to the outright bets in this one. I think this is what people all came here to see. This is what the chat's buzzing about now. Who's going to win this race? How much money can we make off it? There's a lot of value out there. Phil, let's start with you. You got a big smile on your face. Who's making you smile that big to bet on to win this one?
So it's just funny because, I laid out my strategy. I like to play a bunch of guys at long shot numbers. And the funny thing is, like more recently, it's been the guys that have been towards the top of the board winning the last, few races on the super speedway. So it makes it for an interesting conversation because we're talking about how it's fun. And then the favorites, I guess you would say, have gone out and kind of spoiled it. But I'm going to keep with the theme of having fun tonight and going for a super long shot. Again, play it safe as far as your unit allocation. I'm not saying throw the mortgage by any means on it, but 36-1, little fun on Noah Gragson. He's got a win at Daytona in the Xfinity Series in his history. In 8 races there, he's got a win. I believe it's 2 top 5s and 3 top 10s. So, not fantastic, but he knows how to get to victory lane. And his last 4 super speedway starts in the Cup Series, average finish is 17.0. That's actually 11th in that time span. And his last couple races were 9th and 3rd at Talladega this year. So, I mean, the guy can drive on super speedways. He's part of that Ford camp. No pressure on him as far as needing to get in. He knows where he's going next year. This season, it's all just kind of plus money. They're playing with house money. He's just going out and having fun. That's the kind of guy that I like at 36-1. So, yeah, I mean, that Ford camp, we've been saying it. They have a strategy. He's part of that, and he's got the talent to get it done. So if you're looking for a fun play further down the list, I'll throw Noah Gragson's name out there.
Okay. Little Gregson action. I like that. Greg, what about you? Gregson to Greg. I like that. Good segue there.
Good, yeah, segue.
Well, I'll tell you, the outright market's been tough for me. I had Logano. I snatched him up yesterday out at 15-1 because he just got hung out there way long by FanDuel. That shortened down. He's, I don't think you can get him longer than 12-1 right now anywhere. And I can't go on that price. So honestly, right now, I'm not super interested in the outright market. I don't have anything that I love at the moment. Yeah, if you want to talk about something, I like looking at some of those longer shot Fords. I like Noah Gragson out there at that price. Todd Gilliland's out there at 66-1 at 365. Like that's not one that I hate. It's not one that I've bet yet, but it's one that I've looked at, kind of stared at for a little while, trying to figure out if I could do it. And Ryan Preece is hanging out there at 80 to 1 at 365 too. So those are the two that I've been kind of looking at, staring at, trying to decide if I want to pull the trigger on them. I haven't yet, but those two in particular are the numbers that I'm kind of like, yeah, I can see myself getting behind that for, like a 1/10 of a unit or something as a little sprinkle out there. I think they both have the ability to do it. They're in the right manufacturer. They're in the Fords. So I could see them, perhaps pulling off a long shot.
Okay, sounds good there. I definitely like the value for Todd Gilliland. I'm a big Toddy G fan this season. He's been really impressing me. I want to throw an outright winner that I've sort of seen out there that, to me, at least value-wise, makes sense to bet on this one for me. So 6 drivers have finished inside the top 12 in 2 out of the 3 super speedway races this season. None have all 3 for a top 10 or top 12 or anything like that. This one driver I'm thinking about is Bubba Wallace. He had a top 5 at Daytona, top 5 at Atlanta, so 2 fifth-place finishes there. Looked like he was going to finish strong like we talked about in Talladega. Ultimately, Toyota drivers wreck out, everyone except for Tyler Reddick, it seemed. But in this one, Bubba is 16 to 1 on DraftKings specifically. So I'm not sure about the other values that you could find him out there for. But to me, even with that number, I'm kind of liking it with how he has raced at super speedways in the past. He's always sort of leading the field and charging up towards the front. The one thing that does kind of scare me with him is they could be racing for points and sort of not trying to risk it all, as he is now below the cut line -1. But at the same time, if they're all just running in a straight line for most of the race, like we saw at Talladega, maybe that doesn't really factor into his strategy at the end of the race. And he has put himself in position multiple times at other super speedways to get it done. Guys, your thoughts on that? Bubba Wallace in this one, is that a driver that, you'll have your eye on to win this race outright?
Yeah, I'll go first because Bubba, in like our kind of last bet deal that we do, I was going to call Bubba out in a head-to-head matchup. So let's talk about him. He's 21 on FanDuel. That's a pretty good number. And as far as points racing, like if I'm the crew chief of the 23, I'm looking at this race and I'm saying, look, man, this matches up so well with your skill set. We're not points racing. We're doing you. Go do your thing. However the chips fall at the end of this race, it's not going to be anybody's fault. You just go and do your thing. And we'll see where we're at with Darlington. So take that stress off of his shoulders and let him go do his thing, because he's been fucking good on these races. 20 to 1. I'm very interested in that. I didn't see that last night when I was writing my notes. I guess I missed FanDuel dropping their lines, but 20 to 1, I'm into it. I'll go into the head-to-head that I was looking at. It was on MGM, and he's up against Ty Gibbs, who I'm in a perpetual battle with because of atop the Pitbox fantasy lineup that I have. I think I'm going to pull the trigger and drop in Gibbs and going with Wallace this week. I got 2 weeks to do it. This might be the one here. But Gibbs isn't lighting the world on fire on these super speedways. 22.5 average finish. His best finish was 13th a long time ago. And in the last 6 super speedways, so this year and last year. And I'm not including Atlanta, by the way, in that one. I've been ripping those stats off. He's got 1 top 20 at 27.5 average finish. Terrible. Just really bad. Can't figure it out. And Bubba is so damn consistent at Daytona. Not necessarily Talladega, but in those last 6 races, he's 5-1 against Ty Gibbs. So that includes a track in Talladega that he's not necessarily that great at, but he's staggering at Daytona. 10.5 average finish in 10 races. That's absurd. That's absurd. 4 top 5s. He's 10 for 10, finishing inside the top 20. So what does that tell you? When there is an inevitable overtime, which is plus 175, by the way, on Caesars, when that inevitably hits, Bubba Wallace is going to be there. Like the stats say that. So, whether he's up front or he's 13th on that restart or the many restarts, he's keeping the car on the track. So very consistent. I'm a big fan of Bubba this weekend.
Okay, I like that too. That number was surprising to me too. The 10.5. I mean, at a super speedway race where, it seems like everything's chaos, sometimes, wrecks and everything like that. If he's able to consistently finish, I feel like that is a good sign for his outright value this weekend. One driver that surprised me, Greg, in terms of outright value, which I know you mentioned you're not too high on most coming into this one, but Chase Elliott, 18-1 on DraftKings specifically. I'm not sure, there could be better out there, but to me, 18-1 for a driver and Chase Elliott, who has dominated super speedways before, fits his driving style, been a little bit low key, but consistent in terms of finishing up there towards the front. Is that a play you could sort of see you throwing some units on maybe?
Yeah, I mean, Elliott has been really good here. I think I mentioned he has the, series lead in terms of average running position at these tracks in the, in this car. So yeah, you look at 18-1, you like it. I just don't know what it is about. I mean, it's funny, like, to say that Elliott's having a down year was actually a little bit absurd in some ways, right? Because if we look at where he's in the point standing, he's second. He has had the, the points lead at points this year. But I don't feel it right now. It's hard for me to look at what Chase Elliott is doing and feel super confident about what's going on. Is 18-1 value? Yeah, it's value. If you're just looking at it from a, a purely statistical standpoint, that's going to be, value. He is been really good at these tracks. There's no doubt about that. And, so yeah, is that value? Probably. Can I get behind it myself? No, I've just got a mental block on it, basically. It's just hard for me to get there with what I've seen. And again, that doesn't make sense to some extent, right? Because the guy's 10 points behind, Tyler Reddick for the, the series lead. But it's just, he's been a little wonky. I feel like the entire Hendrick camp has been a little wonky. And again, that's so weird to say, as much as they've won and as well as they've performed. But it just seems like something's always happening to at least one of those cars.
Yeah, no, for sure. And especially this season too, like we saw last year, Byron winning 6 races, Larson being him. Elliott was obviously quiet, and same with Bowman, but I just feel like the success they're having this year, like you said, hasn't been to the Hendrick Motorsports standards of leading laps and dominating stages. They have won a lot of races, but maybe not to what we're used to seeing out there. Got a question here from Chris Perry in the chat saying, other than pit selection, does qualifying matter at all? Greg, I'll throw that one to you. You got all the stats there when the race. Qualifying have an impact?
No, it matters not at all. It's funny. So like one of the first things that I normally do each week, when we pull up the stats is I run a start finish correlation, right? And I post that in the Win the Race Discord. So hold on, I'm gonna grab it real quick because I want to get the exact number, but it was like my line was start position does not matter. Okay, so the correlation coefficient between start position and finishing position. All right. So if you had a -1, it would mean your starting position was completely inverted to your finishing position. If you had a 1, it would mean it was, perfectly correlated, and 0 would mean absolutely, no correlation. It does nothing. The correlation coefficient is 0.09. All right. It is basically a flat line, right? It does not matter. It's not relevant at these tracks. I don't care where you start. I don't even really care about your pit box, to be perfectly honest. Like, I'm not really worried about you, coming in and, losing spots on, pit road. I mean, sure. Is there an advantage to being at the front, particularly at the end? Of course there is. If I'm on a late race restart, of course I want to be in row 1 or 2. Like, I don't want to have to be the guy who is the first to break and, form the third line to make the push. But, the math shows us that it doesn't matter.
All right, well, there you go. Can't argue with facts. Thank you for bringing that up. I knew you'd have something special for us in terms of the stats from Win the Race. Now, Phil, back to you. Any other outright winners in this one? We talked about Kyle Busch a little bit. Surprised you didn't mention him yet in this one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely going to be interested in Kyle as we get closer. Like I mentioned him the head-to-head. I've already played that one. So yeah, looking forward to the weekend, just kind of see what he is on race day and assess that. But no, I mean, I could go through like all the guys I sprinkled money on and long shots, but I think we've, I've covered the guys that I would talk about for this show. I mean, for me, the strategy is longer. I was surprised to see Bubba 20-1 right now. So that would fit my billing for what I'm looking for this weekend. So maybe I'll throw Bubba in there as an extra one that I haven't talked about on my pod for an outright.
All right, sounds good there. One last one I wanted to bring up just based off of, my thinking and my process, and this one was Ross Chastain. I'm seeing him at 25-1 to win this one on DraftKings. To me, what stood out about that number was the fact that he was pretty good at Daytona, the Daytona 500. He was right there up until the end. To me, I know how aggressive he could be and can be. We talked about that earlier on in the matchup between him and Kyle Busch. But in terms of also Daniel Suarez winning in Atlanta, I just feel like maybe in a lot of instances where these trackhouse cars have not been up to speed the way they have been in years prior, maybe we've seen an increase in the super speedway package. He also has won at Talladega before. Greg or Phil, either one of you guys, we'll start with Greg if you have any thoughts about Ross Chastain in this one. 25-1, is that number stand out to you, or is Ross a guy that you're just going to be laying off in this one?
25 is probably not quite enough. Maybe you get me in at 30. I mean, the flip side is I don't hate it, but I don't know that it's the volatility. I think we mentioned it earlier. He's so volatile even before you go to a super speedway, and then you add in the super speedway, that volatility is just so high that I think I want more upside before I'm going to take a plunge on him. I'm plugging him in real quick just to see, what the Sim Center says on him on that. Yeah, Sim Center basically says exactly what I thought as I plug it in. Sim Center says plus 30-74, so almost 31-1. That's basically exactly where my thought process is on Ross, is that I need a little bit more on that.
Okay, sounds good. Phil, you agree with that as well?
I would agree with that. And I would also say that, you mentioned his teammate, Daniel Suarez, who's like 50-1. I think there's some better upside with him. Not necessarily like in his full Daytona history, but if you look at the recent, last 6 super speedway races, Suarez actually has decent enough numbers that would make you consider that. Average finish of 18.0, 2 top 10s, 3 top 15s, 4 for 6, finishing in the top 20. He had a victory at Atlanta, like you mentioned. I'm not really considering those for this week. So you have that to add to the mix. It does play a factor. So if you're looking between the two teammates who have, similar cars, I would probably opt for the longer number. Again, that's my theme this week, sprinkle, have some fun. But I think there's some validity there to that.
Awesome. All right, now let's move on to the best values, which will be our final segment here as we close out the show. In order to kick things off, I did want to hit up a comment from Charles, which I feel like goes perfect with this segment. Charles said, when discussing odds and value, can you guys also discuss the lowest odds you would place the bet for? He has Bovada, and at most times the odds are lower than what you guys can shop around for. So for best values in terms of anything that we may have talked about already, or just something else in terms of good value for Charles here in Bovada, and how you guys would sort of strategize your odds or placing your bets with the odds and the lowest ones there. Phil, we'll start with you in terms of Charles's question here.
Well, yeah, I mean, we could give an example. I'll tell you this: Greg is definitely way more equipped to answer that question. He is like the best in the business when it comes to like analyzing that and coming up with the floor on where to bet it. For me, I'm just flying by the seat of my pants most of the time. But so for example, I mentioned how Bubba Wallace got my attention a second ago, right? 20-1. For me, my gut, I would probably play him down to maybe 18, but after that, I feel like that's kind of like further down. I'd say, okay, let me look for a different way to play him if I really want a piece of him. So something like that as an example. The bet I was going to throw out here for best bet, I kind of already mentioned it earlier. John Hunter Nemechek for a top 10. It's 5-1. I mentioned the reason why earlier, but I'll say it again. 3 starts, 11th, 7th. So he did this at Daytona in the 500. If there is chaos, and someone mentioned the weather, 40% chance of rain. That's typical Florida weather, I think, forecast. But who knows? Start, stop, slick track, etc. That opens a door. So for an example like that, I think 5-1 is like right on the money for me to want to play John Hunter, but maybe like 4-1 on a different book, because I know that is the longest odds that we are getting for him. So what's the floor on the John Hunter? I would say for me 4-1. I'm trying to find where he is on like another book just to give a apples to apples. So like plus 260 on DraftKings. That's pretty wild. It just shows you the difference that Bet365 is giving you. So I let's call it 350 would be my floor on him, just because it is a long shot. You're doing it for the long shot purpose,
For sure. And we got to hear Greg's expertise for going back to Charles's question before you give us your best value.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, I think it's going to depend on the bet, obviously, because the way I'm looking at it is, as a general rule, I've got, kind of 2 things that I'm looking at. One, I'm looking at, the Speed Geeks Sim Center over at Win the Race, right? So I'm looking at what we've got at that. And then I'm looking at kind of my own calculations on what I view as, fair value. So obviously it's going to be different by every bet. I'm looking to keep myself some edge on what we think is fair value, right? So I think we've got, going back to the Justin Haley bet. All right, we got fair value. I think we've got around plus 450. All right, so I'm not going to bet it at 450, right? Because I think that's what's fair, right? Like I'm not going to bet it at fair odds. I want to have an edge. So for me, Justin Haley, my floor on that top 10 is probably about 475. 475, 500. That's right where, I see the value line at. If we look at the Austin Cindric bet, I'm not betting that at under plus 110, right? I want that edge. Like I think it's a coin flip, so I'm not going to bet it at a coin flip. I'm going to bet it at that plus 110. That's going to be where my floor is. And again, it's just going to depend on every bet. But I think what you have to do is, if you're analyzing it in that way, is you want to figure out, what do you think the fair odds are? Build in, and I talked about this actually the other day. I had somebody ask us this question in the Discord, and I kind of went on a long rant about it. But basically, I'm taking, particularly for outrights, right? I'm taking whatever I think as the fair value odds of it. I'm building in a 5, maybe a 10% margin of error to say that I'm off on those odds. And that's giving me what I think is, okay, I've built in a margin of error, and if it's at this number or longer, I still have an edge. And so that's where I'm willing to bet it. So, I can't say it as a general rule. I can't say like, oh, take whatever I have and, knock 10% off of it, and that's my floor, right? Because there's sometimes where we're going to have a huge edge. And I'm like, well, you could go way, way, way down on that. And then there are going to be other times where the edge is, a lot more minimal. So you can't, you can't slice it as much. So I think that's what you have to look at. And again, some of it's your risk tolerance. Some of it is, your accuracy and how strongly you feel about it. So I'll say this, I'll go to, kind of my next one, for my best bet is Martin Truex Jr. to be the top Toyota at plus 650. You can get that over at Bet Rivers or Ballyvet. And here's the thing about Truex, right? He does not have the finishes at these tracks. It's absolutely atrocious. And at some point, I normally say on these tracks, like, finishing doesn't really matter. Like, finishing is not predictive of finishing. I'm far more interested in how much you're up front, what your average running position are, right? Like that's all way more important than your actual finishing position at predicting future finishing position. Finishing position's not predictive until it is, right? With Martin Truex, maybe we finally gotten to the point where it's predictive, right? But a couple of stats as to why I think that plus 650 number is simply too long, and I would take it down to about plus 600, right? Okay, so he is the leader in the Toyota camp in average running position at 13.72. He's the leader in top 10 laps of the Toyotas at 300 or 813 laps in the Gen 7, all right? More importantly, he is the only driver in the entire Cup Series this weekend who has completed every single lap at Talladega and Daytona in the Gen 7 car. All right, over the past 10 races, one driver, Martin Truex Jr., has finished every single lap. Of course, his finishes are all crap because he ends up at the back of the lead lap, but he's on the lead lap. But you look at that. At some point, that's gotta come out. Maybe this is fool me once, fool me 11 times, shame on you, fool me 11 times, shame on me. All right, it's going to be shame on me. The odds say he's going to do that more than the implied 13.33% that we're getting at plus 650. I'm going to take it. I'm probably going to be cursing it on, Saturday evening when on the last lap he's leading and wrecks out or something. But the number's just too good. At plus 650, there's only 8 Toyotas in the field. I gotta take that. And it goes again, kind of to the same thing we were talking about earlier with the Jones and Nemechek bets. There's just not that many Toyotas, and so give me some of the guys with a little bit longer odds. I think if I was going to add other ones, those would be the 2 others that I would add. Would be the Jones and the Nemechek. So I like that, but my favorite of them is Truex.
I love that. A third masterclass we just had there. Appreciate all the insight and analysis there. Phil's got someone. What's up, Phil?
I just wanted to throw it out there to you guys. Is this the first time Austin Hill's raced at Daytona in the Cup Series, driving the 33? Like, has he been in Daytona in the Cup Series? Because 3-1 to win the Xfinity Series race. I think he's raced Atlanta and maybe Talladega in the Cup, but has he raced Daytona in the Cup Series before? Because you can get monster odds on someone who is a perennial powerhouse at Daytona, and I just didn't know if he's done it before. I was trying to look at like Wikipedia, but I couldn't find anything. It looked like he missed out on a race in qualifying or something. It must have got rained out. But does that interest you guys at all? Like Austin Hill, just no slate of information to work off of, but it's Austin Hill.
I can't figure out what to do with Austin Hill on that. So yeah, he's one that I have looked at for that as well. He has not raced at Daytona in the Cup Series. He's got 1 race at Atlanta and 1 race at Talladega. The Talladega race, he finished 24th. But again, that wasn't in wasn't an RCR. That was in a Beard Motorsports. I mean, I'm assuming it was probably prepped by RCR, but that it wasn't there. He's got the 1 race at Atlanta last year. Again, that was in a Beard car, damaged vehicle policy 37th. I don't know what to do with him. He's one that I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to handicap because, as you said, he is a powerhouse.
It's interesting that, this is the first time we're seeing him at Daytona, and I think we made a case for Kyle Busch. We were making the case for the poetic justice for Austin Dillon, NASCAR rig kind of thing. And those would be his teammates. So, interesting.
What were the odds that you mentioned for him? 33-1 to win?
To win? I think you can get him out at like 80 almost.
Oh, yeah. He's a really long shot to win the race.
Way long shot on the win.
Yeah.
And it does make you wonder.
Yeah. Plus 390. Let me see what he's plus 500 to finish top 10 on Bet365, plus 350 on Bet Rivers or FanDuel, I think, for top 10. Yeah, I mean, he's down there with the likes of Nemechek and BJ McLeod and those guys. He's down there. So interesting. 100-1 on Bet Rivers. Holy shit! I mean, doesn't that seem like it's kind of a must bet, right? Like,
yeah, that one to me is
100-1. I'm going to tell you right now, he's 100-1 on Rivers. I'm going to go bet that right now.
Yeah, like that's crazy.
I can't not put a 1/10 of a unit on him at 100-1 like that. No, he's getting a 1/10 of a unit on me at 100-1 right now. Like I'll do that right this second.
Yeah.
I also like what was it, top 10 at plus 500. I feel like even like that's one where you sprinkle a little bit on, at least based off of his super speedway, the way he's been racing there in the Xfinity series. Now, it won't necessarily translate. I feel like the racing is so much different, but I could still see him being strong at this track, at least trying to push his way towards the front because he has nothing to lose too, right? Like what is he? I don't even know if he wants to go to the Cup Series. Austin Dillon's going to be back, so if he's just racing in there for fun, he's going to try to go all out, or at least push Austin Dillon and Kyle Busch towards the front. So to that standpoint, I could see him cracking the top 10 sort of with that strategy there. One thing, now last call for the comments as well. We're about to wrap the show up and give these guys a platform to express where we can find them all at. So this weekend and the podcast and the shows they'll be on and social media as well. So last call for the comments. Get any other questions you guys have in now. Want to throw it back to Drake and Greg. You were talking about Martin Truex Jr. before, in terms of him being the top Toyota. I think he's at that point. Drake did ask 25-1 for him to win outright. Is that something that you can kind of find in the same mentality of him being the top Toyota, or is that sort of not where you want to look at with the outright value where it's at?
No, I don't dislike that. I think, if you want to take a kind of bigger shot at it, I think you can. The Fords, I do feel like have a leg in some ways there. So the 6.5-1, I think, is still a pretty big value that I like more. I don't hate 25 though at all. I think that's a perfectly reasonable number for him to win the race. Again, he just has such trash finishes that's like, I like that little bit more cushion of like, hey, if he trashes out, maybe all the other Toyotas go with him and he ends up being the one who rolls the furthest and ends up getting the top Toyota line. So that would be my kind of thought process, but no, I certainly don't hate that at all.
All right, awesome. So, Phil, where can everyone find you at? The podcast for the trucks is coming out once they put the lines up. How can we listen to that and everything else you got going on this week?
Yeah, I appreciate everybody for hanging around. Tino, thank you for hosting. Greg, as always, amazing insight. And everyone in the chat, great stuff tonight for a really fun race. You can find me at Full Tank Phil, Instagram and Twitter, and Full Tank with Phil. It's the name of the pod. And yeah, the Truck Series pod, NASCAR Betting Preview Show on anywhere you get your podcast. We're going to see what we can squeeze out, this week. It's going to be tough with Derek traveling and all and my schedule, but we'll see what we got. These books, man, they got to figure it out. They need to get more consistent when they're doing that. But in any case, we'll have a good weekend for sure. And good luck to everyone throughout the whole weekend. It should be a fun one.
Some Sunday trucking as well. But remember about that, because honestly, I didn't even know until I was logging on to do the show. Didn't even know that was the craze. Greg, what about you, man? Win the race for sure, but anywhere else, social media and anything where people could follow you and explain to some of the viewers out there that may not know about Win the Race what they are offering with so many great things that you have in store for us.
So obviously the main spot's going to be wintherace.info. We've got daily fantasy projections for NASCAR. We've got a massive kind of sim center that, uses information inputs from myself, from Ryan, from some other members of the team, from Joe, that, runs 10,000 simulations of the race and kind of gives us fair odds on it to let us know where the bets are, and gives us something to gauge it against. So you can go there. We got weekly, monthly memberships you can take a look at and join and see how it works out for you. So I'm obviously available there and in our Discord there. That's linked to that membership. And then I'm on Twitter, gmathern84. And also on the Action Network app, I'm a verified NASCAR expert, and all my bets are tracked there, along with the other random stuff that I do on MLB and coming up college football, NFL. Ready to get back to those, make some money.
Hell yeah, let's do it. Super excited for the racing action from Daytona. You guys can follow me at Tino, Pattigno, across all social media platforms. Super excited to get back into the winning ways, see, what may happen in this one. If you guys have any, comments in watching this back, be sure to comment down below. Thank you so much for the support from the IBT family as well. Thanks for having me on. Shout out to Derek for giving me the opportunity to host the show. Really appreciate it there. You can tune in to more of my NASCAR betting analysis on SiriusXM NASCAR Radio. I have weekly spots there coming out, host with them live or join them live sometimes as well. Through the Gears, my podcast with Front Stretch, you can tune in there for more of my best bets analysis and more. And then also, hey, if you guys like to read, I'm writing some articles for Auto Racing Digest. So if you want to tune in there, we throw in some pictures too. So, words and pictures there both ways. So appreciate everyone tuning in. Stay safe. Have a great weekend. Tune in Saturday night. Going to be an awesome race from Daytona and hopefully win some bets too. See you guys next week for the NASCAR Betting Preview Show.